Hello, this is Jerry, and welcome back to the Old Testament prophets. Last week we observed the final adventures of Jeremiah. He was initially captured and chained by the Babylonians during the destruction of Jerusalem, and he was released about 5 miles north of Jerusalem when the Babylonian commander recognized him. Wow, a shekel for your thoughts when you were in chains, Jeremiah. And why was Jeremiah released? Do you remember? Well, because the Babylonians knew that he had always preached submission to Babylon as the Lord's will. Now, who was Gedaliah? Do you remember? We're doing a little review here. He was appointed as governor of Judah and Jerusalem by Babylon. And he had a great policy of peace and submission to Babylon in accordance with what the Lord wanted and what the people needed. When Gedaliah established peace and security in Jerusalem, then what happened? Yes, people started returning. They had fled the country as refugees when Babylon came upon them, and now many of them were returning. And God did a great thing for all these people. Do you remember? Yes, he sent a great harvest of figs and olives and grapes. Everything was going well. And then came the tragedy. Gedaliah was assassinated, and many of the survivors taken captive as slaves to Ammon by Ishmael and his crew. But Kohanan and others rescued the people, but because they were now afraid of Babylon because of that assassination, Kohanan led the people where? Yes, to Egypt. And they took Jeremiah with them, even though Jeremiah said the Lord didn't want them to go there. And that's where Jeremiah ended his days, in ministry to them, and no doubt putting together the book of Jeremiah and Lamentations. We also talked about the legacy of Jeremiah, and we noted his resilience in the face of very little fruit or encouragement. And he had a long, faithful ministry as a single person. Yes, the Lord told him not to get married, and so he had no spouse, he had no children. Even his family and friends had turned away from him, if you remember. Jeremiah would be an encouragement to all those who walk through life alone. Okay, well, let me share my screen now. So today we're going to look at the book of Lamentations. Now, the book of Lamentations was almost certainly written by Jeremiah, though the book does not name the author. It has generally been agreed by God's people that Jeremiah wrote this. Like Ecclesiastes, which doesn't name the author, but people know the author as Solomon. Now, first, think of what a lament is in terms of a genre of literature. It is a poetic writing or song expressing mourning, sadness, and tragedy, not usually just in behalf of a person. That's more of an elegy. An elegy is written about a person more, not to be mistaken with eulogy, which are your more positive comments. Now, in 1915, the Canadian Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae wrote a lament during World War I. He noticed that around the graves of the soldier dead in the Flanders region of Belgium, there grew poppy flowers. In his lament, he gave voice to these dead veterans. In Flanders fields the poppies blow, between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks, still bravely singing, fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. That is a lament. McCrae died of pneumonia in the last year of the war, as you might know of the great influenza epidemic in 1918. Now, the book of Lamentations gives not a solitary lament, but 5 in its 5 chapters. One lament was not sufficient. The authors started over again 4 more times. But Lamentations is unique in ways. A few times it rises from the ashes to express hope and to affirm the faithfulness of God, as if to address the possible insinuation, where was God in all this suffering? There are also brief prayers within. Lamentations is also a literary piece of art, being both in Hebrew poetry and in acrostic format. Now, an acrostic in literature is when the first letters of each new line combines to spell a word, give a message, or progress through the alphabet. Lamentations is an alphabetic acrostic in chapters 1 to 4. So here's how it works. There are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet and 22 verses in chapters 1, 2, 4, and 5. Now in chapters 1, 2, and 4, each succeeding verse uses the next letter. In chapter 3, there are 66 verses, with each alphabetic beginning letter used 3 times in a row, like A, B, B, B. So, for example, here is the start of chapter 1. The first verse with Aleph, the second verse with Beit, the third with Gimel, Dalet, Hey, etc. The acrostic makes it easier for memorization, but it also points to a complete expression of mourning. Every letter is working and contributing to this lament. There was no haste, but Jeremiah took a lot of meditative time to put the book in this creative, artistic framework. And as I noted, Lamentations is also in poetry. Not unusual for a lament. Your Bible will format this as poetry. Again, a lot of creative thought. Yes, this is scripture inspired by God, but Jeremiah's heart and mind were fully engaged while writing this. Also, the lament is in the presence of God. He's there and is the cause of all this suffering. Jeremiah mentions Babylon over 150 times in the book of Jeremiah, but not once in Lamentations. God rightfully sent this judgment. So Lamentations is instructive in lamenting the right way. Would they have the tendency to lament in a wrong way? Yes. Notice Zechariah about 70 years later. Now the people of Bethel had sent Sharezer and Regemelech and their men to entreat the favor of the Lord, saying to the priests of the house of the Lord of hosts and the prophets, "Should I weep and abstain in the 5th month, as I have done for so many years?" Then the word of the Lord of hosts came to me, "Say to all the people of the land and the priests, when you fasted and mourned in the 5th and in the 7th months, for these 70 years, was it for me that you fasted?" So these fasts for the destruction of Jerusalem in the 5th month and the 7th month for the assassination of Governor Gedaliah, were they really done as to the Lord? And the implied answer is no. The nation needed the book of Lamentations. Now, outside of a few well-known verses in Lamentations, I think it is safe to say that the Christian church knows very little about Lamentations. It is a difficult book to hit cold because of the depth of emotion, perhaps like walking into an emotional funeral and you don't know anyone. But if the Christian church doesn't connect to Lamentations, the Jewish nation certainly does. Jews around the world still mark the day when Jerusalem and the temple were destroyed and the people taken. In fact, the day is doubly sad because, according to history, both Solomon's temple in 586 BC and the Second Temple in AD 70 were destroyed on the same day in August. That is, on the 9th day of the 5th month of Av, Tisha B'Av. And so just saying that day in the calendar brings to their mind sadness, like when we say 9/11. Now, not all Jews observe Tisha B'Av. Many secularized or more liberal Reform Jews do not. I didn't see anything in the calendar of the Reform or Progressive Temple Bethel in Fort Myers. But then I wouldn't be surprised if some individuals there observed Tisha B'Av on their own, because a large part of world Jewry does. And one day can't capture all the grief, so there is a 3-week time each year. In 2025, the 3 weeks from July 13 to August 3rd is the time when Jews will be somber and put off the normal enjoyments and luxuries and happy expressions of life, especially on those last 2 days, August 2 and 3. And what is one of their most common sources to chant mournfully? Well, it is the book of Lamentations. This notice from a previous year. This is the central piece of scripture to help them mourn. And they also take this time to memorialize other tragedies, the Jewish massacres during the Crusades, their expulsion from Spain in 1492, the Jewish Holocaust during World War II. Listen to Rabbi Jonathan Sachs on the question of the Jewish theological response to the Holocaust.
Speaking personally, the most profound Jewish response to the Holocaust I know is Sefer Echa, the Book of Lamentations. The book written after the destruction of the first temple. The poetry of lament, bitter lament, lament unto death. It is one of the most searing pieces of literature ever written. And we said it in memory of the loss of the first and second temples on Tisha B'Av, on the 9th of Av, on the saddest day of the Jewish year. I know of no more profound theological response.
Yes. So the suffering of the nation has been so immense. There just has to be an annual memorial, not only with services, but a remembrance through the hours of each day. In the Old Testament, they would wear sackcloth, a very effective reminder not to be happy. Today they do other things. The Jews will not wear leather shoes during this time, too comfortable. Put away the delicious foods. Fast. Limit your washing to only what is necessary for health. Don't come to their services all dressed up. And don't sit in comfortable chairs. Notice this picture again. They're on the floor. And definitely don't greet each other with friendly hellos. The Jewish observance of Tisha B'Av is more than mourning. It's also a reflection of the bad actions of the nation that brought this judgment. Jews are supposed to reflect and learn. This is to be productive mourning in a sense where they grow. Now, studying the Old Testament certainly takes us to places that are beyond our individual and national experience. Nobody has ever made the United States suffer like Babylon made Judah suffer. Nobody has demolished all the Christian churches in our capital and major cities and robbed us of our nation and taken us to another land as workers. And then imagine that after we gained it all back by God's help, we lose it again. We lose our nation again, as the Jews did in AD 70 with the destruction of the Second Temple, followed by what's called the diaspora, or the scattering of the nation as refugees to other nations. Lamentations speaks to us in our apathy. Is it nothing to you, all you who pass by? Look around and see, is any suffering like my suffering that was inflicted on me, that the Lord brought on me in the day of his fierce anger? not boasting in their suffering, but just a plea to give some thought as to the depths of her pain. Now, as I read the text of Lamentations, remember our lesson on Hebrew poetry from some months ago. It is not rhyming. It is not even a lot of meter in their poetry. There are a lot of couplets where a second phrase in some way complements the first phrase so that we don't lose that thought. We stay with it and make our understanding more deep. So let's hear the lament of Jeremiah in the ESV translation. How lonely sits the city that was full of people. How like a widow has she become, she who was great among the nations. She who was a princess among the provinces has become a slave. A powerful beginning. Jerusalem was personified as a woman, a widow, a slave. Here is William Story's sculpture from 1879 of the woman Jerusalem. Now, she's cleaned and restored from what you can see on the picture on the right. She sits amidst rubble, sad and pensive, and barely noticeable on the bottom left there is a small snake. Let me see if I can put an arrow on that, pointing to the work of Lucifer behind this tragedy. Now, when the Roman Emperor Vespasian triumphed over the Jews in AD 70 and destroyed the Second Temple, he minted coins with this same kind of image. Look at this. Judea was personified as a mourning woman under a palm tree with the caption, Judea capta, Judea conquered. Here she is again on a gold coin with the caption, Judea devicta, Judea defeated. She who was a princess has become a slave, Jeremiah wrote. Now let me read without comment for a bit. She weeps bitterly in the night with tears on her cheeks. Among all her lovers she has none to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They have become her enemies. Judah has gone into exile because of, or perhaps under, affliction and hard servitude. She dwells now among the nations, but finds no resting place. Her pursuers have all taken her in the midst of her distress. The roads to Zion mourn, for none come to the festival. All her gates are desolate, her priests groan. Her virgins have been afflicted, and she herself suffers bitterly. Her foes have become the head. Her enemies prosper, because the Lord has afflicted her for the multitude of her transgressions. Her children have gone away, captives before the foe. From the daughter of Zion all her majesty has departed. Her princes have become like deer that find no pasture. They fled without strength before the pursuer. Jerusalem remembers, in the day of her affliction and wandering, all the precious things that were hers from days of old, when her people fell into the hands of the foe, and there was none to help her. Her foes gloated over her. They mocked at her downfall. Jerusalem sinned grievously. Therefore she became filthy. All who honored her despise her, for they have seen her nakedness. She herself groans and turns her face away. Her uncleanness was in her skirts. She took no thought of her future. Therefore her fall is terrible. She has no comforter. O Lord, behold my affliction, for the enemy has triumphed. Now, up to now, the lament seemed to be from an invisible narrator, or Jeremiah himself, speaking in the third person about Jerusalem. But now, with this one sentence prayer, using the first person, my affliction, we begin to wonder if it is the woman Jerusalem speaking all along, reflecting upon herself in the third person voice. With this short prayer, the woman moves from an introduction and short summary of the tragedy to including the Lord, addressing him in the second person, you. The enemy has stretched out his hands over all her precious things, for she, that is Jerusalem, has seen the nations enter her sanctuary, those whom you forbade to enter your congregation. All her people groan as they search for bread. They trade their treasures for food to revive their strength. Look, O Lord, and see, for I am despised. Here is the second prayer. In the first person, look, O Lord, and see, for I am despised. From on high he sent fire, into my bones he made it descend. He spread a net for my feet, he turned me back. He has left me stunned, faint all day long. My transgressions were bound into a yoke. By his hand they were fastened together. They were set upon my neck. He caused my strength to fail. The Lord gave me into the hands of those I cannot withstand. Now, that's a fascinating picture. Jerusalem's sins captured and forged into a physical yoke of slavery. Perhaps Charles Dickens read this because it reminds us of Jacob Marley, the ghost in The Christmas Carol. When Marley was speaking to Scrooge about the heavy chains Marley had to bear through eternity, consequences of Marley's sins during his life. I wear the chain I forged in life. I made it link by link and yard by yard. And so the woman Jerusalem confessed that her sins were made into a heavy yoke of slavery and punishment. The Lord rejected all my mighty men in my midst. He summoned an assembly against me to crush my young men. The Lord has trodden as in a winepress the virgin daughter of Judah. For these things I weep, my eyes flow with tears, for a comforter is far from me, one to revive my spirit. My children are desolate, for the enemy has prevailed. Zion stretches out her hands, but there is none to comfort her. The Lord has commanded against Jacob that his neighbors should be his foes. Jerusalem has become a filthy thing among them. The Lord is in the right, for I have rebelled against his word. But hear, all you peoples, and see my suffering. My young women and my young men have gone into captivity. Jerusalem confesses the Lord was in the right to do this. Remember the immediate audience, the Jewish nation. Lamentations is giving spiritual perspective. I called to my lovers, but they deceived me. My priests and elders perished in the city, while they sought food to revive their strength. Look, O Lord, for I am in distress. My stomach churns, my heart is wrung within me, because I have been very rebellious. In the street the sword bereaves, in the house it is like death. Another prayer, and another plea for God to notice her pain and suffering, even though she deserves it. They heard my groaning, yet there is no one to comfort me. All my enemies have heard of my trouble. They are glad that you have done it. You have brought the day you announced. Now let them be as I am. Let all their evil doing come before you, and deal with them as you have dealt with me, because of my transgressions. For my groans are many, and my heart is faint. Well, it's a final prayer in this first Lamentations. Yes, you have brought me into judgments, but now please judge those who express so much evil against me, Jerusalem. Well, we have just read the first of 5 laments. God knew the nation needed to grieve. That's very legitimate. So almost all the chapter helped them to mourn appropriately. But within these 22 verses was more, including the right place of the Lord. He was not accused. He has been just, and the right place of God's people. Yes, they were wrong. They brought this upon themselves, but the chapter did not harangue the Jews or beat them over the head because of their sin. Almost all the chapter was legitimate mourning. Just a few measured but important mentions of God's place and their place as sinners. Can we say God was being sensitive in their time of grief? The Lord was teaching Judah how to view themselves, how to view God, and also how to view sin. How do you think the Jews were feeling now about their sins of idolatry and murder and persecution of the righteous? They were on the other side of sin now. The consequences, the part of sin that is never anticipated or advertised. The cost. In conclusion, the Lord gave this book of 5 Lamentations through Jeremiah as needed and helpful scriptures to help his people grieve in a way that was appropriate and godly, with the right perspective on the Lord, on themselves, and on sin. God is sensitive to humanity. Well, of course he is. He designed us. And though Judah was fully deserving of judgment, God guided her in her mourning. So the book of Lamentations was a gift to a grieving nation and to all who are driven to lament. And I think last, we should not forget the spiritual benefit of this book to Jeremiah himself, the weeping prophet who had invested his whole life for the nation, now in captivity. Every word of the book of Lamentations was deeply heartfelt by the prophet. And no doubt he was the first of many to greatly benefit from this book. Thanks very much.